Still living on welfare. My father's voice sliced through the warmth of candlelight, sharp as the edge of the silverware gleaming before me. The chandelier above the dining hall shimmered like ice, scattering light over crystal glasses and polished marble floors. Laughter followed, thin, elegant, rehearsed. I sat motionless at the far end of the table, my hands steady even as the air around me froze. They thought I was trembling from shame. I wasn't. It was the quiet weight of knowing something. None of them did something that would change everything before the night was over. Outside, snow fell over Aspen Heights like a curtain of glass. Inside, the Bennetts performed their annual pageant of perfection. Father Edward Bennett retired. Construction magnate, turned self-appointed patriarch, stood at the head of the table, champagne in hand. To his right, my mother Sylvia, wrapped in scarlet silk, smiled with the precision of someone who'd practiced it for decades. To his left, my brother Lucas poured himself another glass of wine, his Rolex catching the light like it was part of the decor. And here's to the Bennett legacy, my father declared, voice booming against the vaulted ceiling. A family built on hard work, success, and good decisions. His eyes flicked toward me, the smirk almost imperceptible. And some of us are still figuring things out, I suppose. Still living on welfare, Hannah. The room broke into laughter. Even the chandelier seemed to tremble with it. I smiled, slow and polite. Something like that. He leaned back, pleased. At least you're honest. Mother placed a manicured hand on his sleeve. Edward, please, she murmured, though her lips curved upward. It's Christmas. It's true, he said, swirling his drink. And truth builds character. I took a sip of water, letting their laughter roll over me like distant thunder. My family loved the sound of their own voices, especially when those voices echoed off marble and pride. They thought I had failed because I no longer fought for a seat at their table. What they didn't know was that I'd built my own quietly, piece by piece, in places they never looked. The roast scent drifted across the room, mingling with pine and expensive wine. Sylvia raised her glass. To family, she said, and everyone echoed, to family, as if the words still meant something. I watched the firelight dance against the glass cabinets, glinting off silver picture frames, the Bennetts at charity galas, ribbon cuttings, and ski trips. Every photo told the same story: success, reputation, legacy. None of them included the years I spent invisible, rebuilding in silence. Lucas leaned toward me, voice dripping casual cruelty. So what do you even do these days, Hannah? Still chasing design gigs? I'm busy building, Lucas, I said. He chuckled. Well, I suppose somebody has to keep the art schools in business. The table laughed again. I reached for my phone under the napkin just to check the time. 8:43. A small golden notification glowed on the screen. Maggie Coleman transfer complete. Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. I locked it instantly, slipping the phone back beside my plate before anyone noticed. Always glued to that phone, Father muttered. No wonder she's still broke. I lifted my gaze to meet his. Some calls are worth answering. His brow furrowed, uncertain if it was defiance or sarcasm. It didn't matter. I didn't need to explain. The conversation moved on to stocks, new contracts, Lucas's failing startup disguised as a promising tech venture. Mother praised his entrepreneurial spirit while I traced the rim of my glass and thought of the call I'd just received. 6 years ago, they'd laughed when I said I wanted to build something of my own. They called it naive, reckless. My father said I'd come crawling back within a year. He was wrong. Now the same man mocking my unemployment was sitting beneath a roof I quietly owned. The paperwork had been finalized that morning. The Aspen Heights estate, the marble floors, the chandelier, the acres of pine outside was no longer Edward Bennett's pride. It was mine. I looked up at him, framed by candlelight and ego, and wondered what expression he'd wear when he found out. Sylvia's voice broke the moment. Hannah. Dear, you look so pale. Are you eating enough these days? I smiled. More than enough. Lucas smirked. Government assistance treating you well? The laughter came again, gentle, poisonous. I set my fork down carefully, the sound of metal against porcelain sharp in the hush that followed. You know, I said softly, the funny thing about assistance is sometimes it comes from the last place you'd expect. For a second, no one spoke. Then my father barked another laugh louder than necessary. Always the philosopher. You should write a book about your struggles surviving without success. The others laughed obediently. The room shimmered with cruelty disguised as class. But I just smiled, eyes steady, heart calm. I'd waited years for this exact scene, the mockery, the laughter, the arrogance that blinded them. Because in less than an hour, all of it would belong to me. Through the window, snowflakes drifted like falling stars, catching on the glass before melting away. My reflection stared back at me, a faint outline against gold and crystal. I didn't look like a failure. I looked like someone about to rewrite the story. Across the table, the housekeeper, Maria, the only one who'd ever treated me like more than a disappointment, caught my eye. She gave a small knowing nod. Father raised his glass again. To success, he said grandly. To legacy. To illusions, I whispered under my breath. What was that, he asked. Nothing, I said with a smile. Just thinking out loud. My phone vibrated again, louder this time. Everyone turned to look. The name flashed across the screen, Maggie Coleman. Realtor. Business call, Lucas teased. Didn't know the unemployment office worked holidays. I rose smoothly from my chair. Excuse me, I said, voice calm. I think this call might be important. Sit down, my father ordered. We're not done here. I met his eyes steady. Oh, we are. Silence fell thick and awkward. The chandelier's light reflected in my wine glass, scattering gold across my hand. As I turned to leave, I heard my father mutter to Lucas, "She'll never learn her place." I paused at the doorway, half-turned, my voice soft but cutting. You're right, Dad. I learned to build my own. The music swelled, a Christmas carol about peace on earth, irony heavy in every note. I walked down the marble corridor, the echo of my heels sharp against the silence. The phone rang again, insistent. I answered, "Ma." Bennett Maggie's voice was warm, professional. Congratulations. The transfer for Aspen Heights has cleared. You're now the official owner of the Bennett estate. I looked back toward the dining hall where laughter still drifted faintly. Thank you, Maggie, I said. My reflection shimmered in the glass door, calm and steady. That's exactly the Christmas gift I wanted. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, behind me, the family I once begged to see me would soon realize they'd been living under my roof all along. They called me poor. They called me weak. Tonight, I'd let the walls tell them otherwise. The snow outside Aspen Heights fell like fine glass dust, glittering beneath the streetlights as I closed the study door behind me. The laughter from the dining room was now muffled, receding brittle china tucked behind heavy oak. I set the phone down on the desk, its screen still glowing faintly with the confirmation, transfer complete. Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. The study still smelled of my father leather whiskey and the faint hint of cedarwood cologne that had haunted my childhood. On the wall hung a framed photograph, Edward Bennett, in a navy suit, shaking hands with a senator. The brass plate beneath it read, "Building America's Future." You built empires out of concrete, I thought, tracing the cool marble of the desk, but I built mine out of silence. I pressed my palms against the desk, leaning forward slightly, eyes closing for a brief second. The warmth of quiet victory ran through my veins, steady and clean. No fireworks. Just gravity. Property deed, Hoodview Mansion owner, Blue Oak Holdings, LLC. Managing Director, Hannah Bennett. The house my father mocked me from, now legally mine. A knock at the door broke the moment. It was Maria, the longtime housekeeper. "Miss Hannah," she whispered, slipping into the room, "your father is asking for you. Dessert is being served." I turned, my expression composed again. "Tell him I'll be right there." Maria hesitated, her eyes scanning my face. "Everything all right, dear. Perfect, Maria." I smiled. Everything's finally perfect. When she left, I caught my reflection in the tall glass window, once more the woman I had become. No longer the girl who left this house with my resume in one hand and shame in the other. I tucked the phone into my clutch and exhaled. Time to go back in. The hallway glowed golden from chandeliers overhead. As I walked, the echoes of my heels on the marble floor felt different now, less like submission, more like punctuation. When I re-entered the dining room, all eyes lifted. My father raised a brow. "Business call?" he asked, his tone half curious, half contemptuous. "Something like that," I said. The conversation continued with its orchestrated performance talk of market trends, ski resorts, luxury real estate prices. I listened silent, my expression unreadable. When dessert arrived, a gold-dusted chocolate soufflé, of course, Edward lifted his glass again. "To family," he declared. "To success, and to those who know how to earn it." Lucas grinned, raising his own glass. "And to those who don't." I set my glass down, looked my father straight in the eye, and smiled faintly. "Maybe persistence just runs in the family," I said. "Not everything I thought, just the truth." As dinner drew to an end, Maria reappeared. "Mr. Bennett, the heating control in the West Wing seems off. Should I call the property manager?" I caught Maria's eye, the faintest flicker of understanding passed between us. My father waved dismissively. "Handle it tomorrow. Tonight's for the family." When the room finally quieted, I set my napkin down neatly. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "It's been enlightening." Edward frowned, sensing something in my tone. "Leaving already?" "Yes," I said, standing slowly. "I have a new place to check on." Lucas snorted. "Government housing inspection." My smile didn't waver. "A final inspection." I turned toward the window. The chandelier above them blazed with golden light, casting reflections across the table, and for an instant my father's face caught in one of them, washed in gold. The ghost in gold, I thought. The man who once owned everything and didn't realize he'd already lost it. I walked into the snowstorm, quiet, golden, unstoppable. The road to Aspen Heights curved through a forest of white silence. I sat in the back seat of my hired car, watching the reflection of the woman I barely recognized in the dark glass. The house I once dreamed of owning didn't belong to my father anymore. It belonged to me. The thought sat quiet inside me like a secret too heavy to speak aloud. My phone vibrated once Maggie's name lit up on the screen. "Everything's finalized," her voice said over the hum of static. "Blue Oak Holdings officially owns the property. They'll never see it coming. I'm counting on that," I whispered, and ended the call. The gates of the Bennett estate opened automatically. The mansion appeared through the white haze stone walls, gold-trimmed arches. It looked like something carved from winter's pride, flawless and unwelcoming. When the car stopped, the front doors opened before I could knock. Maria stood there, her eyes the same deep brown warmth that had once comforted me. "Miss Bennett," she breathed. "You came back." "Different," I said quietly, stepping inside, "is the only way to survive here." The warmth of the house didn't touch me. The air was thick with the hum of conversation and piano music drifting from the main hall. I could hear laughter, my father's loud, commanding familiar. I walked toward the sound. The grand living room was filled with guests. Edward Bennett stood by the fireplace, as tall and proud as ever. Lucas was beside him. "Well, look who decided to show up," Lucas called. "Guess the city life took your spirit, huh? You look too quiet for success." Edward chuckled. "Let her be, son. Some people like living small. It's less to lose." I returned their smirk. "Merry Christmas, Dad." From the corner of my eye, I saw my mother, Sylvia. "Hannah, darling, you look simple." I suppose that's the new trend. Simplicity lasts longer than status, Mom. For a moment, I stood still, letting the noise blur around me. The scent of cinnamon champagne and money filled the air. "They talk about success like it's a bloodline," I murmured to myself. "But success has new DNA now." Maria appeared beside me, carrying a tray of tea. Her eyes dropped to the phone on the table, the screen lighting up briefly. "Blue Oak Holdings, LLC. Transfer confirmed." "Congratulations, Miss Bennett," she whispered. "Not yet," I murmured. From across the room, my father's voice boomed again, calling for everyone to move to the dining hall. I followed the stream of guests through the archway, each step echoing on the marble floor like a countdown. I took my seat near the end of the table. Lucas poured champagne, glancing toward me. Still chasing ghosts, Hannah. I hear those quiet investments don't pay the heating bill up here. I smiled lightly unfazed. No checks, just quiet investments. My father laughed. Don't be harsh, son. Your sister always liked her little dreams. Keeps her busy. I lifted my glass, my voice calm. And you always liked underestimating people, Dad. Keeps you blind. The table fell quiet for half a breath. Dinner continued a perfectly orchestrated performance. At some point, I felt the faint buzz of my phone in my lap, a message unseen waiting. My pulse quickened. As dessert was served, laughter swelled again. My gaze drifted across the table over my family's gleaming faces. Their arrogance, the empire they thought still belonged to them. Outside snow continued to fall thick and soundless. They thought I came back for forgiveness. But I came back for the title deed. And when the phone buzzed again, louder this time, I knew the moment was coming. The clock had just struck 9, and the rich golden chocolate soufflé was melting perfectly on crystal plates. The laughter at the Bennett table was reaching its peak, loud, confident, the sound of people utterly secure in their world. I sat near the end watching them, my pulse steady. The time for waiting was over. Edward Bennett was mid-story recounting a business triumph. And that gentleman father concluded, raising his glass high, is how a real Bennett closes a deal. With vision, not daydreams. I set my fork down carefully, the metallic clink cutting through the noise. Every eye turned to me. It's funny you mention closing deals, Dad. I said, my voice soft but clear, carrying easily across the sudden silence. He frowned, his smile freezing. And what would you know about closing deals, Hannah, more than you think? I lifted my water glass. In fact, I just closed one tonight. I ignored Lucas's usual jeer and focused on Edward. Maria. I called out gently, catching the eye of the housekeeper. Maria came to the table immediately. Yes, Miss Hannah. Would you pour me something from the good bottle, please? I asked. The reserve. My father slammed his glass onto the table. That's not for guests, Hannah. You know that. I smiled at him. Then it's a good thing I'm not one. The silence was total now. I took the phone from my clutch and placed it face up beside my plate. It glowed faintly, displaying the final confirmation message, Maggie Coleman, welcome home, Ms. Bennett. The title deed has been registered. Lucas leaned in, squinting. What is that, a stock update? It's business, Lucas, I said. Business? Father scoffed. Since when do you have business? And what does it have to do with my reserve wine? Maria returned with the dusty bottle. I met my father's furious eyes. Tonight, everything in this house belongs to me. I said the words, quiet but electric, delivered as a simple, undeniable fact. The reaction was instant. Lucas swore. Sylvia made a small, choked sound. Edward stood up fully, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. What in God's name are you talking about, Hannah? Is this some kind of sick joke? No joke, Dad. I looked pointedly at the phone. Blue Oak Holdings officially acquired the Hoodview Mansion, your Aspen Heights estate, this evening. The transfer cleared at 8:43. I looked up at him. I own the deed. I own the house. I own this Christmas dinner. He staggered slightly. That's impossible. Who is Blue Oak Holdings? I smiled a victory 6 years in the making. I am. Managing director and sole owner. The room dissolved into gasps. Maria quietly poured a generous measure of the reserve wine into my glass. I took a slow sip. Then I rose with the quiet authority of a landlord. I should get some air, I said. Stay, Father thundered. You will explain this right now. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the shocked faces. You're right, I said softly. We're just getting started. I walked down the marble corridor and out onto the balcony, the cold biting at my skin. Behind me, the muffled sound of shouting and panic began to rise from the dining hall. I let out a slow exhale, watching my breath mist into the night. My house. I took a final steady drink of the private reserve, smiled into the snowstorm, and prepared for the reckoning. The city skyline glittered like a promise as my private jet descended into Denver. Dawn had barely touched the mountains, and the horizon was painted in shades of steel and amber. Inside the cabin, I scrolled through my inbox, a silent rhythm of control in every swipe. Overnight, 3 offers from investors, 2 partnership requests, and 1 message that made me pause. From Lucas Bennett, subject, urgent, call me. I let the screen dim without replying. Some things deserved silence. When the jet touched down, my driver was already waiting. "Morning, Ms. Bennett," he said, holding the door open. "Morning," I replied, slipping into the back seat. My phone buzzed again, another message from Lucas. "This time Dad's in trouble. Call me." Trouble. That word always sounded different when it came from my brother. Usually it meant Dad's losing control. As the car rolled through the snow-dusted streets, Denver shimmered like a machine that never slept. I exhaled slowly. The city didn't care about my last name here. It cared about results, numbers, ownership. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Lucas. It was my assistant, Clara. "Morning, Hannah. Your 9 o'clock briefing is confirmed, and Alden Group just approved the Hoodview expansion." "Congratulations, boss." A flash of pride warmed me. This was the language I preferred, clear and based on proven action. "Thank you, Clara. Let's add a call with our legal team at 10. I want the title finalizations ready by Monday." "Already ahead of you," Clara replied. "Also, there's a voicemail from your brother." "You want me to delete it?" "Not yet," I said quietly. "Forward it to me." In the voicemail, Lucas's voice trembled beneath a thin layer of arrogance. "Han, listen. Dad's company is in trouble. The board's turning on him. He doesn't know I'm reaching out, but you've got the capital now, right? Maybe you could help. We could rebuild together. It could be a Bennett comeback." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. A Bennett comeback. That used to mean something to me when I still wanted to belong. Now it sounded like a desperate echo from a house built on pride and rot. When I arrived at the Blue Oak Holdings Tower, my reflection greeted me in the mirrored glass, poised, deliberate, untouchable. The girl who once walked out of my father's mansion in shame had become the woman who could buy it twice over. Inside, the elevator chimed open to a sea of glass offices and polished marble. My staff greeted me with quiet respect. Clara followed close behind, tablet in hand. "The numbers are looking incredible," Clara said. "We're set to close the Redwood Estates deal next week. The press is calling you the silent architect of Denver real estate." I smiled faintly. Let them talk. We build, they label. By mid-morning, my phone lit up again. Lucas. Persistent as always. This time I answered. Lucas. Finally, he exhaled. "I've been calling since yesterday." "Did you get my message?" "I did," I said evenly. "You're vague as usual. What exactly do you mean by trouble?" He hesitated. "The company's collapsing, Hannah. The board's furious about Dad's losses in that Utah development project. They're threatening a vote to remove him." I turned toward the window, watching the snow drift across the city below. "And you think I should save him?" "I think you can," Lucas said. "You've got the connections, the capital, the reputation. We can restructure together, you take control." Dad steps aside quietly. Everyone wins. I let out a small laugh, low and sharp. Everyone except the man who taught me failure was a lesson in obedience. Lucas sighed. "He's different now. He's shaken. You humiliated him at Christmas, Han. He's not the same." "I didn't humiliate him," I said. "I told the truth. He just wasn't ready to hear it." There was silence on the line. "Look," Lucas said finally, "you always said you wanted to prove him wrong. Well, you have. Now maybe it's time to prove you're better." The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the city humming beneath my feet. Being better. That phrase hit harder than I wanted to admit. By afternoon, I sat in my office, the snow now falling heavier. Clara entered quietly, placing a folder on my desk. "What's this?" I asked. "Financial reports from Bennett Developments. I pulled them after your call. They're bad." I flipped through the pages, red ink everywhere. My father's empire was bleeding out. "Would you like me to schedule a meeting with their CFO?" Clara asked. "No," I said softly. "If they want to talk, they'll come to me." My office wasn't a safe space for panic calls. Hours later, as dusk crept over Denver, I sat alone in the darkening office. I thought about the struggle, the exile, and the man who once told me I'd end up with nothing. I reached for my phone again, but stopped. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my legal team, subject strategic acquisition, Bennett Developments, confidential body. Initiate review of all public and private holdings. Prepare silent acquisition strategy under Blue Oak Holdings. Keep it off record. When I hit send, a sense of stillness washed over me, not joy, not vengeance, just the certainty of control. I knew what I was doing. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about taking what was rightfully earned and rebuilding something clean. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the mountains. A storm was coming. I stood crossing the office to the window. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the girl who begged my father for approval. It was the woman who no longer needed it. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Lucas. "He's losing everything, Hannah. Please, don't let him go down like this." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Sometimes the only way to rebuild is to let what's broken fall. I put the phone down, my heart steady. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the city in silence. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe in peace, the kind that came from knowing the next move would change everything. Down below, the lights of Denver pulsed like a living thing. And somewhere far away in Aspen Heights, my father stared at a stack of failing reports, realizing the storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. My father's face was the color of fresh ash. He was still leaning on the mahogany table, where the crystal gleamed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence I had imposed with my announcement lingered heavy and toxic, far more deafening than the piano music they'd relied on. Lucas was the first to move his chair, scraping back violently as he lunged forward. "That's a lie. You forged it, Hannah. Or you tricked some lawyer." I didn't flinch. I let him yell, the sound echoing hollowly in the house he no longer owned. I addressed my mother, Sylvia, who stared at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "It's no trick, Mother. The records are public. Blue Oak Holdings bought the debt when the market crashed 6 years ago, and last month I finished the transfer. I own the deed to the Aspen Heights estate." Sylvia pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. "But the bank statements, the restructuring. Your father swore he saved it. He saved his pride. Not the house," I stated. "He used the capital I provided, never bothering to ask the source, and pretended to rebuild. He's been living under my roof for 6 years, trading on my silence." Edward Bennett pushed himself upright, his voice dangerously low. "You bought us. You think this makes you better than me, you little opportunist?" "It makes me the landlord, Dad," I said, rising slowly from my chair, my voice calm as a tomb. "And that gives me the power to ask you all to leave." The room erupted. Guests began murmuring, looking for the nearest exit. Lucas stared at me with hatred, his arrogance replaced by raw fear. "Leave," Lucas repeated, disbelief thick in his voice. "Where do we go, Hannah? This is our home." It was I corrected. "Now it's my asset, and my patience has run out." I glanced at the grandfather clock. "You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. I expect the house to be empty and all personal belongings removed by tomorrow evening." The weight of the ultimatum felt immense but necessary. I watched the gold light of the chandelier tremble above their panic, cold and detached, realizing the price of my freedom was their ruin. My father's hand swept across the table, knocking over crystal water glasses that shattered on the marble floor. "You can't do this. I'm still Edward Bennett. You're a delinquent tenant." "Edward," I countered, stepping past the wreckage. "And I've just served you notice." I walked toward the doorway where Maria stood, her face a mixture of shock and quiet satisfaction. The gold-dusted chocolate soufflé suddenly looked grotesque, a monument to a collapsed facade. "And your company, Edward," I pressed, turning back for a final cut. "Bennett Developments. I hear the board is preparing for a vote of no confidence after the Utah fiasco." His eyes widened, realizing I knew about his business failings, the subject of my strategizing in Denver. How do you know about that? He gasped. Like I told Lucas, I said softly, I'm always busy building. And sometimes you need to clear the old foundation before you can start fresh. Lucas stepped in front of his father, desperation twisting his features. Hannah, please. We were wrong. We'll change. But don't let Dad lose the company too. We need your capital. We need Blue Oak Holdings to step in. I looked at my brother, remembering his voicemail request. You said I should prove I'm better. This isn't about saving him, Lucas. This is about saving the legacy from the man who drove it into the ground. I walked up to Maria and took the reserve bottle from her hand, setting it gently on a side table. Maria, I said clearly, ensuring my family heard every word. Effective immediately. You are the property manager for Aspen Heights. I'm doubling your salary, and your first job is to supervise the removal of the former residents and ensure no Bennett property is damaged in the process. A slow, steady smile spread across Maria's face. Yes, Miss Hannah. Consider it done. I met my father's horrified gaze one last time. He looked utterly defeated, the ghost in gold finally dissolving. Merry Christmas, I whispered. Your 24 hours started now. I turned, leaving the broken glass and the chaos behind me. As I walked down the marble corridor, the string quartet music was gone, replaced by the sharp, panicked voices of the Bennett family finally realizing they were exposed to the cold. I paused at the front door, looking back at the shattered illusion. I wasn't leaving in shame this time. I was leaving in victory. Outside, the snow had stopped. The air was clear, clean, and fiercely cold. The perfect reflection of the freedom I had just claimed. The shouting had died down, replaced by the hushed, terrified whispers of the remaining guests and the ragged breathing of Edward Bennett. The air around the long mahogany table was thick with the scent of broken pride and expensive wine. I stood where I had finished, letting the weight of the 24-hour ultimatum sink into the marble floors. Edward was pale but trying to hold on to his remaining scraps of authority. He slammed his fist down one more time. You're delusional, Hannah. This house is in debt, not an empire. You own a pile of stone and a mortgage. That doesn't give you the right to destroy your family. Lucas, equally shaken, stepped forward. She's bluffing, Dad. Blue Oak Holdings. It's just a shell for this one house. She's trying to scare us. I looked from Edward the fallen titan to Lucas, the predictable echo. You both still think small, I said, my voice tinged with genuine disappointment. The house was just the first piece. Edward's eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? It means your arrogance is an expensive blindfold, I replied. You were so busy laughing at the unemployed daughter you never bothered to track the company that saved your ass 6 years ago. We established that Edward spat. You saved us from the bank. Fine, but Bennett Developments is still mine. You have no leverage there. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that felt unfamiliar even to me. That's where you're wrong, Dad. I didn't save you from the bank. I bought the bank's controlling interest in your debt, and I kept buying. Lucas scoffed. So one house and a pile of small investments. What else, Hannah? A duplex in Denver? No, I said calmly. 7 properties along the Aspen Range, including the Hoodview Mansion. And Blue Oak Holdings is the majority shareholder in the company you used to finance your Utah development project. Edward stared, his expression suddenly vacant. The Utah? No. The investors, my partners, they didn't abandon you, Dad. I clarified, my tone professional, not vengeful. They sold their position to me 6 months ago. You signed the papers without reading them. You didn't even realize I owned the debt that secured your entire investment firm. The room went silent, a deeper silence than before. This wasn't about family now. It was about the collapse of an entire corporate structure. Lucas staggered back. You bought out Bennett Holdings, the private fund. Yes, I confirmed. You didn't see it because I didn't want you to. You spent years teaching me that power is control. I learned that real control is silence. Edward's face was utterly defeated, his hand gripping the table edge for support. He looked at me, no longer seeing a daughter, but the architect of his ruin. You did all this, just for revenge. I sighed, the sudden exhaustion heavy on my shoulders. It was never just revenge, Dad. It was about proving that the name Bennett stands for something more than your pride. And the only way to prove that was to take the power you refused to share. Across the table, Maria walked in carrying a small polished wooden box, a box I recognized immediately. She placed it gently beside my plate. Miss Hannah Maria whispered, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "You forgot this." It was the box where my father kept the original signed charter documents for Bennett Holdings, a symbol of his absolute authority. I opened the box. The heavy paper felt cool beneath my fingers. I looked at Edward one last time, then closed the box. "The 24 hours started 2 minutes ago," I announced to the room, my voice crisp and final. "I suggest you spend them efficiently." I turned toward the doorway. This time there was no challenge, no shouting. Only the deep, echoing silence of the Bennett name crashing down around them. I didn't pause as I walked out, the soft thud of the study door closing behind me, sealing the fate of the ghost in gold. Outside, the air was clear and cold. The snow was a distant memory. I walked toward my waiting car, the sound of my heels on the marble, now the sound of new ownership, new legacy, and new peace. The morning after the acquisition went public, my name had already begun circulating across Denver, though I hadn't issued a single statement. Blue Oak Holdings had absorbed Bennett Developments overnight, a silent acquisition no one saw coming. I sat at my kitchen counter, coffee steaming in my hands, staring at the city skyline. The phone on the marble counter hadn't stopped vibrating since dawn. Messages from journalists, investors, former colleagues, all demanding comment, explanation, attention. But one notification made me pause. Incoming call, Edward Bennett. My father. For several seconds, I didn't move. The name glowed on the screen like an unfinished sentence. Then with a slow exhale, I answered, "Hannah." His voice was rough, brittle. Not the booming confidence I remembered. "You went through with it?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Blue Oak now owns the controlling shares. The company's debts will be managed by my team. You think that makes you noble?" His tone sharpened. "You didn't save me. You stole my legacy. I salvaged what you left burning," I replied, calm and precise. "Your board would have sold the assets to the highest bidder in a week." "They were my people," Edward snapped. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said quietly. "You taught me that business has no place for weakness. I'm just following the lesson." A silence stretched between us. I could hear the faint hiss of his breath, the weight of defeat pressing through the line. Then almost softly he asked, "Was it worth it?" "Yes," I said. "Every piece of it." And I hung up. The sound of the call ending felt like a door closing on a long, echoing hallway. Moments later, Clara entered the apartment with her tablet and a wary expression. "You saw the news, right?" "I've seen enough," I said. "Reporters are camped outside the building. They're calling this the most unexpected corporate twist of the year." Clara hesitated. "Do you want to make a statement?" "No," I replied. "Let them write their version first. Ours will last longer." Clara nodded but lingered. "Your father called again this morning. His assistant said he's not doing well." "I'm aware. Do you want me to send flowers?" "Not yet," I said, eyes still fixed on the snow. "He doesn't like reminders of mortality." By noon, I was back at Blue Oak headquarters. The air inside my office was sharp with the scent of espresso and ink, the quiet hum of power in motion. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, illuminating the sharp lines of the furniture. Ian, my head of finance, was waiting with a folder. "The transition is complete," he said. "The public announcement is scheduled for 3 p.m. Our PR team prepared a statement about legacy restoration and responsible management." "Cut the word legacy," I said. "We're not restoring anything, we're rebuilding." Ian nodded. "Understood." As he left, Clara slipped in again. "Lucas is here." My hand froze on the pen. "Show him in." Lucas entered, coat still dusted with snow, eyes heavy from lack of sleep. He looked older, or maybe just smaller. He stopped by the window framed against the bright, indifferent Denver skyline, the contrast making his expensive suit look suddenly cheap. So it's true, he said, voice trembling. You actually bought it. I leaned back in my chair. You sound surprised. I am, he said. I thought you just wanted to make a point, not own the entire company. I didn't want to make a point, I said quietly. I wanted to make sure the people working there didn't lose their homes because of Dad's arrogance. Lucas frowned. You think that justifies humiliating him? This isn't about humiliation. My tone hardened. This is about accountability. He shook his head. He's been up all night, Hannah. He won't talk to Mom, won't eat. He keeps staring at the old stock certificates like they're going to rewrite themselves. I turned toward the window, watching snow drift across the rooftops. He's staring at ghosts. He's still our father. Then maybe he should have acted like one. Lucas was silent for a moment, then quietly asked, Do you even remember what it was like before all this? Before the money, before the company, I looked at him, really looked. Beneath the layers of tailored clothes and practiced charm, he was still the boy who'd once protected me from bullies. I remember everything I said, and that's exactly why I can't pretend anymore. He hesitated, then slid a small envelope across my desk. He wanted you to have this. I didn't reach for it. What is it? His will. For the first time in years, I felt something flicker. He's revising it. Lucas continued. Said he's leaving everything what's left of it to Mom. You're not in it. My expression didn't change. He already took me out of his life once. A few legal documents won't make a difference. Lucas studied me. You've really changed, he whispered. No, I said, my voice low and steady. I just stopped asking for permission to exist. After he left, I finally picked up the envelope. It was sealed in thick ivory paper. I didn't open it. Instead, I placed it inside the small wooden box Maria had given me, locked it, and put the box in the drawer. That night, the snow deepened. Denver shimmered beneath a quiet storm. I stood by my window glass of red wine in hand. My phone buzzed again. Another message from an unknown number. He's asking for you. I didn't need to ask who. For the first time since the acquisition, I felt something I hadn't in years: hesitation. I set the glass down and exhaled. Outside snowflakes pressed against the glass. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail. I played it. Hannah. My father's voice rasped, weaker than ever. The snow is falling outside. I don't expect forgiveness, but if you have any left to give, come home. The message ended in static. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I whispered into the silence. Home stopped being a place when you turned it into a business. I turned off the lights. Behind me, the locked drawer held my father's will, unopened, untouched, unnecessary. Because Hannah Bennett didn't need an inheritance. She had already built her own. And tomorrow, the world would finally know who I really was. The snow had turned to slush by morning. The once pristine drive of Aspen Heights was streaked with gray tire marks and footprints that led nowhere. By the time I came downstairs, the house was silent, eerily so. No laughter, no voices, just the low hum of the furnace and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. The party was over. My father's glass sat abandoned on the table, half filled with melted ice. A wine stain marred the linen like a bruise. I stared at it for a long moment before setting it upright, a pointless act of order in a room full of wreckage. The Christmas tree still sparkled in the corner, defiant in its beauty. Everything else had collapsed. Maria was in the kitchen when I walked in, wiping down the counters with slow, deliberate motions. They left early, she said without looking at me. Around dawn. Did they take anything? Only their pride. I think, she replied, finally glancing up. Her eyes softened. And perhaps a bit of your peace. I smiled faintly. They can keep that. I have enough left to rebuild it. I poured coffee into a mug, black and strong. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in years. Maria hesitated, then asked, Will you let them stay? In the cabins? Perhaps I leaned against the counter. I'll give them choices. The same ones everyone gets. Lease agreements, fair terms, respect in exchange for responsibility. But free rides are over. She nodded slowly. Boundaries, she said, testing the word like it was new to her tongue. Exactly, I said. Boundaries, keep things standing. Outside, a car engine started. I moved to the window and saw my father's old black Mercedes rolling down the hill, snow spraying under its tires. My mother sat in the passenger seat, her hand over her mouth, staring straight ahead. Lucas's truck followed behind, bed loaded with hastily packed boxes. Watching them go didn't feel like victory. It felt like quiet closure. When the gate closed behind them, I whispered to myself, "For once it's not me leaving." I turned back to the house. It was mine now, legally, physically, irrevocably, but it still carried their ghosts. Every corner echoed with old conversations, every wall held an imprint of judgment. I'd bought the deed, but cleansing it would take time. By afternoon, the lawyer called. "Everything's settled," Marcus said, his voice crisp but warm. "Your family received the eviction notices. None have contested so far, though I expect at least one desperate phone call." "Let them call," I said. "I'm done playing mediator." "Good," he said. "You've done more than most people could. It's time you live in what you've built." "Maybe," I murmured. "But right now it just feels like I've cleared the old foundation to prove I could stand in the ashes." After the call, I walked the halls of the mansion, each room echoing differently now. My father's study still smelled of cigars and arrogance. The desk drawers were empty, but I could almost hear his voice lecturing me about legacy. I sat in his chair, running my fingers over the grain of the wood. It had been carved by a craftsman whose name my father never bothered to learn. Ownership, he used to say, was the only language that mattered. "Funny," I whispered to the empty room. "Turns out I speak it fluently now." The door creaked open and Maria appeared again. "You should eat," she said softly. "Not hungry?" "Then walk," she suggested. "Let the walls breathe." So I did. I stepped out into the cold, the wind biting at my face, and followed the path down to the frozen lake. The ice reflected the pale sky like glass. I stood there, looking at my reflection, fragmented, imperfect but mine. A crunch of snow behind me made me turn. It was Lucas. His breath puffed white in the air. He looked thinner, his suit wrinkled, his pride gone. "I figured you'd come here," he said. "You figured it out." He stopped a few feet away. "Dad won't talk to me. Mom won't stop crying." I said nothing. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he continued. "Just to say, you were right. About everything." "That's new," I said quietly. He laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I used to think you were weak. Always keeping quiet, always saying sorry. I never realized that's how you learn to win." Silence stretched between us. He scuffed the snow with his boot. "Amanda and I found a small apartment downtown. 2 bedrooms. It's humble." "That's good," I said. "Humility's a solid foundation." He nodded. "I just wanted you to know we'll be okay. Eventually." "Good," I said again. "That's all I ever wanted for any of us. To stand without leaning on each other's throats." Lucas hesitated, then extended a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, no resentment, no rivalry, just acknowledgement. "Take care, Hannah," he said. "You too, Lucas." He turned and walked back up the path, his figure shrinking against the horizon. I watched him until he disappeared behind the trees. The wind howled briefly, then fell still again. By nightfall, the house was warm once more. Maria lit candles along the hallway, their light flickering against the stone walls. I sat by the fire, laptop open, reviewing property reports for Blue Oak Holdings. 12 properties now, 13 counting Aspen Heights. All rented, all profitable. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't mock or belittle or twist the truth to fit their ego. Numbers were honest. As I typed, a new message pinged. It was from my mother. "Your father and I are staying in a rental house by the river. We'll manage. I just hope you're happy now." I read it twice, then replied, "I'm not happy, Mom, but I'm finally free. There's a difference." I didn't send it right away. I let my fingers rest on the keys, then deleted the message. Some truths didn't need to be delivered. Some were meant to stay quiet, just like the revenge that birthed them. The clock struck 11. Outside, the last of the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, blanketing the estate in silence. Maria walked by her steps, careful, her voice gentle. "You did what you had to do," she said. "I know," I replied. She nodded, then, "Rest, Miss Bennet. The house finally sleeps." When she was gone, I leaned back in the chair and looked into the fire. It glowed gold, alive and patient. I thought about what Maggie had said weeks ago. The gold always finds those who work in silence. Maybe she was right. Maybe revenge wasn't about noise or spectacle. Maybe it was just about standing still while the world finally saw you for what you truly were. The flames flickered, and in the glass of the window, my reflection shimmered back at me. Not the girl who'd been mocked at her father's table, but the woman who owned the table, the walls, and the story. Outside, the snow erased every footprint that had marked their departure. Inside, I breathed in the quiet. The house was finally mine. Completely, irrevocably mine. The first week after the eviction felt unreal. Every morning I woke to a house that was finally quiet, yet it hummed with a different kind of energy, the weight of what I had done. Aspen Heights, once filled with voices that drowned me out, now echoed with my footsteps alone. Silence had never sounded so loud. On Monday, the first set of legal documents arrived, lease agreements, notarized notices, confirmation from the court that every transfer had been processed cleanly. Marcus, my attorney, had handled everything with surgical precision. "You've built a fortress," he said over the phone. "They can't touch you now." "I don't want to fight them anymore," I replied. "I just want to live." "You will," he said, "but peace comes with paperwork." By midweek, the phone calls began. Tyler, first angry and slurred his words, tumbling over each other. "You think you can just take everything. You're insane, Hannah. Dad's thinking of suing you." I let him rant until he ran out of breath. "You can't sue someone for owning what they bought," I said calmly. "You're destroying the family," he spat. "No," I answered. "I'm just ending the illusion." Then I hung up. 2 hours later, my mother called. Her voice trembled on the edge of guilt. "Your father's been sick over this," she said. "He can't sleep. Neither can I." "You've humiliated us, Hannah. The neighbors are talking." I almost laughed. They talked when I failed too. At least now they'll talk about something true. "Money isn't everything," she whispered. "No," I said softly, "but respect is." She sighed, the sound of years collapsing in a single breath. "We never meant to hurt you. You just never cared if you did." The line went quiet, then disconnected. That night I walked through the mansion barefoot, the hardwood cold beneath my feet. The room still smelled of pine and wine, faint ghosts of Christmas clinging to the walls. I paused in the dining room, the place where it all broke open, and traced my fingers over the long table. My father's glass still sat on the sideboard, untouched since that night. I poured the rest of the whiskey down the sink. The sound was final. The next morning brought headlines. Somehow the story had leaked. Local woman reclaims family mansion in stunning real estate turnaround. The article was clinical but brutal, complete with photos from my company's portfolio. My name trended online for a day. The comments were a mix of awe and disgust, half cheering for my revenge, half calling me ungrateful. I didn't read past the first page. Maggie called that afternoon. "You've become a legend in real estate circles," she said. "Quiet success is rare enough, but quiet revenge, that's practically art." "I'm not sure it feels like art," I said. "It feels like the aftermath." "Aftermath is just another word for beginning," she replied. She was right. I started making plans. The empty guest rooms would be converted into offices for Blue Oak Holdings. The cabins up north would be renovated for rental. The lake property would become a retreat space, a place for women rebuilding their lives after loss or betrayal. It felt right poetic, even to turn old wounds into something that healed others. But peace doesn't arrive without a fight. Thursday evening, the security gate buzzer rang. When I checked the monitor, I saw my father standing there alone, coatless snow clinging to his shoulders. His car wasn't visible. He must have walked from the main road. I pressed the intercom button. "What do you want?" His voice crackled through the speaker. 5 minutes. I hesitated, then opened the gate. He walked up the drive slowly, every step heavy with pride swallowed too late. When he reached the porch, I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked smaller somehow, older worn. His eyes darted past me into the hallway as if expecting ghosts. "You look tired," I said. "I am," he admitted. "You win, Hannah. This wasn't a game. Everything's a game in this family," he said. "I just didn't realize you'd learn to play better." We stood in silence for a moment, snowflakes melting between us. Then he said quietly, "I came to return something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key, the one that used to open the study, his sanctuary. "This belongs to the owner now." I stared at it, the brass cold in his palm. "I don't need your permission." "I know," he said, "but I needed to give it anyway." His hand trembled slightly as he extended it. I took the key, and for the first time he didn't flinch when our fingers touched. He looked up at the house, then at me. "You built something real. I didn't see it until it was too late." I wanted to be angry, but I was too tired. "You saw it," I said. "You just didn't want to believe it came from me." He nodded, once defeated but sincere. "Take care of your mother," he said, turning away. "She can take care of herself," I replied. "She never learned how." He started down the steps, then stopped halfway. "You've made this place colder than it's ever been." "No," I said softly. "You just never noticed how cold it already was." He didn't look back. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The key felt heavy in my hand, symbol, weapon, inheritance, all at once. Later that night, I sat in the study, turning the key over and over in the firelight. The flames painted the room gold, erasing shadows. I slid the key into the drawer and closed it gently. For the first time, it stayed shut without locking. The next morning, Maria found me by the window with coffee and paperwork spread across the desk. "He came by last night," she said softly. "I know. You look lighter." "Maybe because he left." She smiled faintly. "You think this is the end?" I shook my head. "No, just the quiet part of the storm." She nodded. "Then rest while it lasts." When she left, I turned back to the window. The snow was falling again, steady and relentless, covering everything it touched. The world outside looked peaceful, like a clean slate. But I knew better. Peace isn't the absence of consequence. It's the acceptance of it. And as I watched the snow erase the footprints on the drive, I finally understood every victory leaves a shadow. The question is whether you learn to live in it or turn it into light. I chose light. The first snow of January fell softly over Aspen Heights, blanketing the world in silence. I stood at the edge of the balcony, watching the valley disappear beneath the white. The house behind me. My house now was quiet, almost reverent. For the first time in years, the walls didn't echo with laughter that wasn't real or compliments that were just polished cruelty. It was peace, and peace sounded nothing like I thought it would. Down below, movers loaded the last of my father's belongings into a van. The estate that once carried his name had been stripped bare. The portraits removed the chandeliers, cleaned the marble floors, shining again. The Bennetts were leaving Aspen Heights not as legends, but as tenants whose lease had expired. I sipped my coffee, the steam rising into the cold air. From this balcony, I could see everything: the frozen lake, the winding driveway, the old pine trees heavy with snow. It used to feel like a fortress I could never enter. Now it was a quiet kingdom I ruled alone. A knock sounded at the door behind me. "Come in," I said without turning. The door creaked open. Ms. Bennett, Maggie Coleman's familiar voice carried through the crisp air. "I didn't expect you to be up this early." I smiled faintly. "Old habits. You learn to wake up early when you've spent half your life fighting to prove yourself." She stepped out onto the balcony, clutching a folder. "It's official. The sale of your Denver property closed this morning. The funds are in your account." "Good," I said. That'll go into the new development project, Blue Ridge Villas. We break ground in March. Maggie nodded, then hesitated. I heard your family's moving out today. I took another sip of coffee, the taste bitter and warm. Yes, they'll be gone by noon. There was a long silence between us, broken only by the soft hiss of falling snow. You could have evicted them sooner, Maggie said quietly. Why wait this long? I turned to her, my eyes calm. Because revenge isn't about speed, it's about clarity. I didn't want to throw them out. I wanted them to see themselves first. To understand the walls they built around me were never real. She studied me for a moment, her expression thoughtful. You sound like someone who's finally done carrying the weight. Maybe I am. I set the cup down. When I first bought this place, I thought owning it would fix everything. I thought the power would feel satisfying. I looked back at the valley. But it doesn't. It just feels quiet. Behind us, footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. A familiar voice broke the silence. You always liked the view from this balcony. I turned. My father stood there wearing the same gray coat he used to wear every winter. His hair looked thinner, his posture smaller. He wasn't the booming patriarch anymore, just a man who had finally run out of things to say. Maggie, I said softly, give us a minute. She nodded and slipped back inside, closing the door behind her. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt like fragile glass, one wrong word, and it would shatter. I came to say goodbye, he said finally. His voice was rough, stripped of arrogance. Your mother's in the car. She didn't want to come in. I nodded. I figured. He looked around, taking in the balcony the mountains beyond. I used to stand here every morning. Though this view meant success, I thought it proved something. And now I asked. He exhaled, his breath white in the cold air. Now it just reminds me how easy it is to lose things you don't respect. The words lingered between us, soft but heavy. For the first time, he wasn't lecturing. He was confessing. I was wrong about you, he said quietly. About everything. I know. He looked down. When you told us you owned the estate, I was angry. I told myself you tricked me, that you were cruel. But the truth is, he hesitated, swallowing hard. The truth is, I didn't want to face the fact that you succeeded without me. I didn't move, didn't speak. He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't seen since I was a child: humility. You did what I couldn't. You built something real. And you did it with integrity. A cold wind swept across the balcony, but I didn't feel it. I never needed you to admit that, I said softly. I just needed you to stop pretending I wasn't enough. He nodded slowly, as if the words physically hurt. You were always enough. I just couldn't see it. The silence stretched again. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. What happens now? You go, I said simply. Start over. Learn to live without the illusion of control. He gave a small, humorless laugh. And you, what will you do with all of this? I looked out over the snow again. I'll keep building. Not just houses, foundations that last. Maybe even something worth passing on someday. He nodded, his eyes glassy. I hope you do. For a moment we stood side by side, two silhouettes framed by the pale morning light. Then he said, Your mother wanted me to tell you. She misses you. I closed my eyes. I miss her too. But I can't go back to what we were. I know, he said quietly. Neither can we. He turned to leave, then paused. You know, when you were little, you used to tell me you'd build your own castle someday. I laughed at you. I remember. He looked down. You did it, and I'm proud of you. The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer. I just nodded. He walked back toward the door, stopping once more. Goodbye, Hannah. Goodbye, Dad. When the door closed behind him, the silence returned, heavier but cleaner somehow. I stood there until the sound of the car faded down the drive. Inside the house felt different. Not empty, cleansed. The ghosts of Christmas past had finally left with them. I walked through the halls, fingertips brushing the cool walls, the scent of pine and wood polish lingering in the air. In the grand foyer, the enormous tree still stood, glittering with gold and white lights. Beneath it there were no gifts, no laughter, just reflection. For the first time, I wasn't the girl in the corner anymore. I was the woman who built her own story from the ashes of someone else's empire. My phone buzzed again, an email from Maggie. Subject: Blue Oak Holdings. New project approval. I smiled. The empire was growing. But this time I'd built it differently, without resentment, without the need to prove anything. The snow outside thickened, covering the last tire tracks on the road. I turned off the lights one by one, letting the house fall into a soft glow. At the doorway I paused and looked back at the grand staircase, the chandelier, the quiet splendor of the life I'd built from silence. Then I whispered to the empty air, "It's finally over." Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing the past layer by layer until only peace remained. The sun melted the last of the snow across Aspen Heights, the light turning the rooftops into rivers of gold. For the first time in years, the Bennett estate looked quiet, not hollow, not cold, just still. I stood at the end of the circular driveway, hands deep in my coat pockets, the same place I'd stood 6 Christmases ago when my father's laughter had followed me out into the dark. Now there was only silence. The mansion's grand double doors opened, and Maria, the longtime housekeeper, stepped out, her face breaking into a gentle smile. "Miss Hannah," she said softly, "he's waiting for you in the study." I nodded. "Thank you, Maria." Inside the house felt smaller somehow. The chandeliers still glittered, but the air had changed. The echo of laughter and arrogance had faded, replaced by something quieter, humility perhaps, or regret. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I walked down the long hallway, the same hallway where I once felt invisible. When I reached the study, I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. On the other side, I could hear the faint crackle of a fireplace and the slow, measured rhythm of someone breathing. I pushed the door open. Edward Bennett sat by the fire, his frame thinner shoulders slumped, but his eyes sharp blue, the same as mine, lifted when he heard me. "Hannah." His voice was softer now, unrecognizable from the man who once filled rooms with authority. "Dad," I said simply. He motioned to the chair across from him. "Sit." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with everything that hadn't been said, the years of silence, the anger, the quiet victories. Edward's gaze drifted to the window. "I saw the news," he said finally. "Blue Oak Holdings. Quite an empire." "I learned from the best," I replied. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I suppose you did." The silence stretched again until Edward exhaled slow and shaky. "I was angry," he admitted. "Angry that you succeeded without me. Angry that you built something I couldn't control." My fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. "You tried to take everything I worked for, and when you couldn't, you called it betrayal." "I know," he said. His voice cracked on the words. "And I was wrong. I studied him. Really studied him." The man who'd once seemed made of iron now looked human, fragile, breakable. He looked up at me again. "You don't owe me forgiveness, Hannah, but I needed you to hear me say it. I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than I expected. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Edward leaned back in his chair, the firelight flickering across his face. "When I lost the company, I thought I'd lost myself. But watching you rebuild me in a way, I realized maybe the empire was never the problem. It was me." I said nothing. My eyes burned, but my voice was steady. "You taught me to survive, even when it meant surviving you." He nodded slowly. "Then I did one thing right." The clock ticked quietly on the mantel. For a long while we sat there, not as rivals, not as CEO and successor, but simply as father and daughter, suspended in a peace neither of us quite trusted yet. Finally Edward said, "I want you to have this." He reached for an envelope on the desk, his will rewritten, sealed again in ivory paper. "I don't need it," I said. "I know," he replied. "But it's not about need. It's about acknowledgement. I hesitated, then took it. My hands brushed his. His skin felt thin cold, but alive. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The hunger, the fight." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But now I build things for peace, not power." He nodded, and for the first time in my life, I saw relief in his expression. We talked until the fire burned low, not about business, not about money, but about small things. Childhood memories, the cabin by the lake, the mother who still loved us both in her quiet, unshakable way. When I finally stood to leave, Edward reached for my hand again. "Hannah," he said quietly, "I don't know how much time I have left, but I need you to know I see you now." My throat tightened. "Then that's enough." Outside, the sky had turned pale blue, the snow beginning to melt into glassy streams along the stone walkway. I walked slowly toward my car, the cold air clean against my face. Behind me, the mansion stood tall, still magnificent, still full of history, but different now. It no longer felt like a monument to my family's arrogance. It felt like something else entirely. I stopped halfway down the driveway and turned to look back. The sunlight caught the windows just right, and for an instant the house glowed not gold, not marble white, but warm. Maria appeared at the door again, waving gently. "He'll rest now," she said. I smiled softly. "So will I." That evening back in Denver, I stood in my penthouse, overlooking the city I'd conquered and learned to love. On my desk sat a single photo, my parents young and laughing, taken long before greed crept in. I placed a hand on the frame. "We did it," I whispered. My phone buzzed a new message from Clara. "Clara Press wants an interview about your legacy as a self-made real estate millionaire. Do we respond?" I smiled. "Hannah, tell them there's no such thing as self-made. Every empire starts with someone you once loved, even if they broke you first." I turned off my phone and walked to the balcony. The city lights pulsed below, alive infinite. The air was cold, but it didn't sting anymore. For years I had built my world on revenge control and silence. But tonight I finally understood something simpler, that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was released. And maybe, just maybe, this was what freedom looked like. The wind brushed through my hair as I whispered to the night, "I'm home now." Then I smiled, not with triumph, not with victory, but with peace. Because the mansion, the empire's fall, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that Hannah Bennett had finally rebuilt something her father never could. A life that wasn't built on control but on choice. And as the city lights shimmered beneath me, I raised my glass quietly and said, "To peace, to boundaries, to the end of needing approval, and to everyone who ever doubted I'd make it." Somewhere out there, the wind carried my words through the night, across the frozen streets of Aspen Heights, into the house where a father sat by the fire, and finally smiled, knowing his daughter had done what he never could. She'd turned power into grace, and in that grace, both of them